Doing this one thing will attract more people to your podcast. I'm Brian Fleming, founder of the Podgasm Marketing Podcast, where I show you how to say what you do in your marketing messaging for your podcast so your podcast will grow. And by the way, if you haven't done so already, make sure you go download the free Speak Your Listener's Language PDF. It's a free PDF. There's a link in the description, and it's going to show you how to say what you do from a position of compelling value very simply so that you'll attract more of the right people to your podcast so they'll listen and subscribe. If you haven't gotten it already, it is a killer resource and it is free and it's short. So go grab it right now. There's a link in the description. So one of the things you want to do to attract more people to your podcast is you want to provoke curiosity out of them. Okay, you want to provoke curiosity. How do you do that? Well, one of the ways to do this is called setting up a callback or opening a story loop. Basically, I used to do this in all my speeches, and I still do in my speeches. I've been a professional speaker for over 17 years now and a copywriter. And when I did this, when I added this one little thing to my speech, the quality of my speech went through the roof. And it was just one little tweak that I planned into the speech. But when I did it, it made all the difference as far as the effect it had on the crowd. And then more people enjoyed my speech because of it. So basically what you want to do here is you want to ask a question in the beginning of your podcast episode. Ask a question up front that they're going to want the answer to. But you don't give them the answer until the end of the episode or sometime later in the episode, okay? And this is something that is going to be compelling to them based on whoever your ideal listener is. So you want to tell sort of a quick story loop opener in the beginning of one of your episodes, or in multiple episodes whenever you do this. So here's an example. As a combat veteran, I could say, after coming home from Afghanistan, I was nominated to receive a free house from a nonprofit organization. And if I received that house, if I was picked, that house was going to be valued at over $500,000. Now, I'm not going to tell you whether or not I won that house until the end of this episode, so stick around. So you see what I did there? I opened the story loop, but I didn't close it by giving them the answer. I want them to stick around to the end. And at the end, when you're doing that, when you're addressing this at the end and closing the loop, that's called a callback. It's used in professional speaking. It's used in storytelling. It's used in comedy, stand-up comedy. It's great. Or here's another example I could use. I could say I was in a sniper shooting competition, and I had to hit my target at 2,500 yards out. It was down to me and one other shooter, one other competitor. And if I hit that target, I was going to win $100,000. Now, I'm not going to tell you whether or not I hit that target yet. I'm going to tell you that here in a few minutes. But before I get to that, I want to tell you this other thing. See what I did there? Open that loop, and I did not resolve it. When you see a movie or you hear a story and somebody opens that up and they don't resolve that loop, they don't close the loop, they don't call back at the end, you'll find yourself walking away from that movie or that story or that podcast angry. Your listeners will be angry. I actually forgot to close the loop in one of my speeches years ago, and I had people coming up to me afterwards at my book table, and they were asking what happened with that one thing, and I was like, holy crap, I forgot the callback at the end. And they were like, what happened? What happened? It was a big deal. And so I actually sent out an email and I let people know, and I apologized. So don't forget to close the loop at the end. It's a very powerful technique. So here's the big question for you. How can you pique your listeners' curiosity? What kind of loop can you open up? What kind of narrative loop can you open up for your listeners that's going to pique their curiosity? Then you delay answering that until you teach them, the beef, the meat of the lessons in your podcast, the bulk of it. And then at the end, you give them that answer that resolves and it makes them feel better and they got the answer that they were so curious about. So here's an example. Let's say let's say you're a mom of a teenager and you have a podcast for moms of teenagers. You might open a loop with something like, teen pregnancies are on the rise and they're at an all-time high. Have you talked to your teenagers about sex lately? Okay, that's a great opening line. It's not exactly like the whole story I just did, but that's the opening of it. Those are the concepts. Or here's another example. Maybe you're a podcaster, maybe you're a new podcaster, and you have a small podcast and you want to grow that podcast. Here's an example I might use. Small podcasts are struggling to survive more than ever. Do you know how to say what your podcast is about in a way that gets people hooked and makes them want to listen more? So do you see what I did there? There's two pieces to this structure, two elements, one after the other. One, you dump a little bit of salt in the wound, and then two, you ask the question. You dump some salt in the wound, and then you ask a question. Dumping salt in the wound is just saying you say something that's something maybe concerning to them. This is one way you can do it. And it's not manipulation because you actually have information that can help people. So what you're kind of playing to the fear a little bit, but not too much, but you're kind of agitating something that they don't want. So you pique their curiosity with a question around a problem that your podcast solves for your listener. And then you put a little salt in the wound by asking the question. Because then that question is what your episode's about that you help resolve for your listener. This is how you attract a lot more people to your podcast, by piquing their curiosity. And there's only those two little elements. You can do it with those two little steps I just gave you. So ask yourself this question. Which of my listeners' struggles can I talk about and dump a little salt on the wound with that my podcast helps them resolve? So again, if you want to attract more of the right people to your podcast so they'll show up and listen and subscribe, you need to know how to pique their curiosity. And by the way, maybe you're thinking to yourself, this is really complicated. I'm not a word guy. I'm not a professional speaker like you, Brian, or a copywriter. I don't know how to work with words to compel people to make decisions and certain actions. Well, hey, guess what? I do. You're in luck. Because every month I do take on a couple, just a very few, very limited number of personal coaching clients who I rewrite all of their podcast brand messaging for them so they can just focus on doing what they love and enjoy, which is having their episodes, talking, getting on there and chatting with people and recording and growing their podcast. All this mental work of the word stuff, leave that to somebody like me. Again, I'm not a good fit for everybody, but I do work with a couple of people a month. So if you're interested, all you need to do is shoot me an email at podgasmshow@gmail.com. You'll see it here on the screen, podgasmshow@gmail.com, and just put the word consult in the subject line. And we'll talk for a couple minutes and see if we're a good fit and see how I can help you grow your podcast.